All right. I'm here with Alec Paul, who's the head of growth at Zero Time Selling and the founder at Sales Brand. And the reason why I'm super excited to talk to him is because he's also the LinkedIn consultant, LinkedIn strategist behind people like Adam Robinson and Sam Jacobs, who, if you're in the B2B SaaS space, I'm sure you've seen or know about. And so today I want to just pick his brain basically on all things LinkedIn, LinkedIn strategy, LinkedIn content, how to write good hooks, etc. So Alec, thank you for joining me.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. It's funny. I always have to. I don't practice what I preach. Like my LinkedIn is so outdated, and I just added that sales brand thing recently. Yeah, Zero Time Selling is my father's company, who is like an original, like a sales influencer, and I do some work with him.
Got
Yeah,
it.
mainly focused on sales brand these days.
Got it.
Yeah, that was a good intro. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm just curious because looking at your LinkedIn, and I think I first heard about you through the Nathan Latka webinar that Adam Robinson joined, and he talked about the LinkedIn
Mhm.
consultant. And I messaged him afterwards, and I was like, "Hey, are you down to share who you're working with?" And you shared you, and so I looked you up, and I was like, I, I'm in that space. Like I know a bunch of people who do this stuff, and I kind of assumed that I would know that person. And so like I found you, and
Yeah,
I was like, this guy like doesn't have really LinkedIn, isn't really posting.
yeah.
When you're
Very
not
funny. Yeah,
connected with you, you don't even have a profile picture. Like only
I
once you
know. I
connect with
changed.
you. So I'm just
I
like,
did all the. I do all the. Yeah. Sorry, I
how
was doing
how
all the
did you
worst
get
LinkedIn best.
into it? Like that's my question, because I feel like most people get into it because they do their LinkedIn and they're successful with it, and then people reach out and they're like, "Hey, you're crushing it. Can you help me with mine?" So like, how did you
Sure.
get
Yeah.
into this whole thing? And maybe you can talk who your first customer was, and yeah, how this whole thing started.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people. Yeah, I don't have an audience. You know what I mean? I haven't built my own audience, which is very funny. Yeah, I had to change those security settings recently, which obviously I tell my clients to do, but I was just whatever. So yeah, my business is mainly like word of mouth, right? So I can give you the background. I originally started on LinkedIn in 2015, probably. Like
Hmm.
the my father is named Andy Paul. He is a sales author, um, and we were starting a podcast, and this was like before podcasts were everywhere, right? There weren't a million
Yeah.
of them, and so we had it's this podcast for salespeople. We figured out the salespeople live on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn was just starting to transition to like a place where you kind of create content. LinkedIn 1.0 was like you just connect with people you met at conferences and try to sell them stuff. But it was like slowly becoming a social network, very slowly. And we had to figure out a way to promote that podcast, right? So, early on, I don't think we used a lot of best practices. We like posted 5 times a day. Like we did all the things you're not supposed to do these days, but like that's how I got started, right? Working with Andy and helping grow him. Like he's at, I don't know, 170 something thousand at this point, but like he's still he's still pretty active. And then eventually that podcast we sold to a company called Ring DNA, which rebranded to
Hmm.
Revenue.io. And so working with Andy, I learned, marketing. Like, what do salespeople want to talk about? What do they want to listen to? What do they want to consume? What are they want to learn a big like qualification, big deals, and whatever. And it's like, how do you turn a podcast into a LinkedIn post, right?
Right.
Um, then we sold the podcast, and I got brought over as part of the Aquahire, kind of, and my responsibilities were essentially just to kind of promote the podcast, right? So that was like 2020 or 19 or something. And that
Hmm.
was right when I like had Justin on the podcast. He had like 30,000, Justin Welsh, obviously,
Yep.
the godfather of LinkedIn. He had like 30,000 followers. I started following Justin, being like, whoa, this can be way more than I thought it could be. Like there's explosive growth here if you can really learn how to write. Because I was writing okay, like on the podcast and stuff, but like until I started like learning from Justin and some of those other like original guys, then I started to pick up on like, okay, here's how you write hooks. Like here's how you keep people's attention on the platform. And then I spent, a year or two really growing Andy's following even more with like just promoting that podcast. And then from there, like that's how I kind of cut my teeth in the sales world. He's a sales influencer. I knew all the kind of sales influencer type guys. They're always on the show. We're always trying to like look at their posts and see what they're doing and get them to promote and help them with their content and so on and so forth. And then, eventually, and actually I commend, and then it led to my kind of first client. His name was Brandon Fulhardy. He like, hey, can you help me? And that was my first time. I'm like, yeah, I can help you. But he wanted to write, and that's kind of historically been, kind of my take on it, right? Like I
We'll dive
think
into that.
we'll get into that. So then I started working with Brandon, and over the years we grew him from 5,000 to 77,000. Launched a big info business on the back of it. That led to more referrals to other kind of sales influencers. I've worked with like Ian Cognac, who got from 10,000 to 65,000. We've grown him, and launched like a multi-million-dollar coaching business off the back of it. And just through all this, I was like learning. I'm like, there's so much power in
Right.
LinkedIn, right? But I cut, quote unquote, cut my teeth with like it's more of the solo consultants, coaches that want to sell to salespeople, right? Because salespeople are like the number one demographic on the platform. I would say it's like salespeople, marketers, customer success, HR,
Yep.
go-to-market functions. And then from there, it's just more word of mouth, word of mouth, word of mouth. And then eventually got introduced to Sam, and that's kind of when I started shifting to, okay, there's a lot of leverage for the individual coaches, but if you're also this, there's a little difference there because you also got to help support them build up a business around it, right?
Yep.
Like, okay, we have all this traffic, we're building this brand, we're building this audience. What do we do with it? Which means like email sequences and sales pages, and how do we craft offers, and all that good stuff, which is great. That needs to be done to monetize the audience. But then you start working with the CEOs a little bit, and it's like, okay, they already have a business, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they have a machine. My job just becomes to pour attention and traffic and like, awareness into the top of that machine so I can focus exclusively on the LinkedIn stuff.
Yep.
And then from Sam, it's, led to a bunch of more. And, that's why you've never heard of me, I think. I've done a good job helping these CEOs and, coaches and executives grow their audience. That just kind of leads to more word of mouth business. People, there's the ultimate advertisement. People are like, how did you do this? And they're like, oh, I'm
Yep.
working with this person, or
Yep.
and then they refer me, and, it helps speed up the sales cycle in a little bit. You know what I mean? Like they're all coming in as referrals, and that's kind of how they've been, my path. And just to give
Yep.
some context or whatever, like, I was trying to add it up for some, I don't know, someone was asking me. I think my clients in 2023 did like, I don't know, like I think it was like 120 million views or something like that. So it's like it compounds over time. I mean, we can get into how it all, I mean, a
Yep.
bunch of the stuff already, obviously. So but you know, yeah, that was my journey. That's how I got into LinkedIn, which is such a
Love
weird
it.
place to be. Like, I
Yep.
never would have thought I'm like a LinkedIn expert. Who would have, you know what I mean? I would not
Love it.
planning to do that.
Well, and you're an actual LinkedIn expert because there's a lot of purported LinkedIn experts on LinkedIn, and
Yeah.
you actually got the work to back up that claim. So I want to now dive into, let's call it the LinkedIn masterclass, or the LinkedIn founder-led marketing masterclass. I kind of want to go through the pipeline with you. So the first thing that I believe we should start with, and feel free to disagree if you see this differently, is before you can dive into the topics and what to talk about and the hooks and how to write the copy, is who's the person talking about these things, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, from your perspective, what do you feel like are the necessary ingredients
Sure.
of the person for this type of motion to work?
Yeah. It's funny because it won't work for everyone, right? Like I think part of my process is I screen a lot of, I take a lot, I'll talk to anyone, right? I'm always just trying to learn and,
Yeah.
what's your business like? What do you say, whatever, because that kind of helps surface the right clients, right? Because it does, as you said, like it doesn't work for everyone. I
Yeah.
think, I mean, it sounds simple enough, but you have to have something to say. Like I think
Yep.
there is a classic, if you look at some of the folks that are selling, there's a lot of personal branding and stuff on LinkedIn. It's like everyone has something to say. I think that is true. Everyone has something to say, but not everyone has something to say that's unique enough or comes from a place of authority and experience enough that you can build a big ass audience on top of, right? You know what I mean? Like everyone can build a little bit of audience, but if you want to build something that like actual leverage for your business. Like you need to have you need to have a perspective on like how things are going now and like in this business and how and why it's wrong and how they should be being built, right? And then you need to be comfortable enough to talk about that in a way that's incredibly authentic and vulnerable. I mean, the other part is that you have to come from a place of experience, right? Like you can't, if you want to sell to revenue executives, like you better have some experience, like being a big time revenue executive on the front line, having experienced these things where you can talk about them and tell war stories, essentially, right? Like, where is this material coming from? Because we can't pull it out of thin air, right? Like, it's like when we think about it, it's like the alpha, the differentiator is like what is in your head. And like, unless it's in there, like you may not know how to be able to get it out, right? You may not know
Yep.
how to craft the content. Like, if we can figure out that it's in there by like talking to you, by, listening to some of your old shows or podcasts and can kind of figure out like, okay, this person has something to say. Let's help them say it. I think that is the biggest differentiator. I don't think it's also black and white. It's like, I think you can learn to a certain degree, but there are those components of like, you need to have achieved a certain amount of success, right? Like you need to have built companies or been executives at big companies or done interesting things, have big losses and stories. And then the final thing is like, you need to be willing to fucking share and be vulnerable about it. Otherwise it's like super boring because it's a game, we're playing a game here. And unless
So
sorry, the last part is like, the other thing I look for is like, you have to be willing to play the game. Like
yes.
you have, which is, easier said than done sometimes. But once and I don't want to take us off track so much, but like you're a founder of a successful business, right? You are a very smart, successful person. If we can take your founder brain and turn it to like LinkedIn content, the same way that you would build a business, okay? Like, here's how you build a good LinkedIn post here. Like, and then you can kind of start getting them to think about it, whereas like it's easier for them to surface like the type of content that would make, great LinkedIn posts.
So if I would summarize it, let's say I have 4 main points, and that's actually that I just built a slide for a presentation, and it's the last point is not quite there, but number one, you need to have actual credibility in a space. That might mean you are the CEO or founder of a company that's successful, right? You're doing 5 million, 10 million, 20 million in revenue, or you've been an executive, a VP, a C-level at a respectable company, right? So that's number one. Number two, you have relevant experience for the people that you're selling into. So if you're selling to heads of sales, you better have experience as a revenue leader, go-to-market leader, or CRO. If you're selling to chief people officer, you better have experience in the HR space, right? That's number two. Number three, you need to have a unique point of view in that field, because even if you were the CRO at Gong and now you sell to heads of sales, so you have a relevant experience, but you're just fully bought into the current best practices and how people do things, then it's like, what are you going to talk about? It's like, you should hire 2 SDRs and, like, you need to have some unique differentiated point of views where you actually differ from the currently accepted best practices or status quo. And then number four, you need to be willing to be vulnerable and, let's say, spicy, because it's one thing if you have controversial point of views, but if you're always like, nah, but I don't want to piss anyone off, I'm not sure if people will, then like we can't translate that into an actual post. Like, you need to be willing to play that game and be vulnerable and be controversial when it actually obviously lines up with the reality. We don't want to be controversial for the sake of controversial.
Totally. Never being inflammatory for the sake of inflammatory. It is a game, right? You got to play it. But like, there's a way you can phrase things or whatever. It's like, you're a very successful person. I know you think these things are stupid, or I know you think these, but it's like, how do we synthesize that into a way that's like, respectable? It's still LinkedIn, you know what I mean? It's not Twitter. Like, you got to be pretty respectful. But yeah, that was a great summary. I mean, I think the one on the contrarian take, I do think there's some room for people that are like really great tacticians, right? Like, I don't, if maybe you are okay with the way current things are and you're not trying to radically change, blow up the world or whatever. But like, man, again, if you're a really good tactician or strategist or whatever, again, we can package that stuff up into a way that's, highly consumable. But you need some competitive differentiator there.
Right.
I think you nailed on one that maybe we can get into that more. Is just like like you said, Adam, I think probably talked about this a lot when he was talking about D2C content. Like it didn't
Yep.
resonate because he was not he sold to D2C people, but he was not himself a D2C person. It
Yep.
wasn't until he is a B2B SaaS guy. So once he started transitioning to talk about that type of stuff, then it resonates, right?
Yeah. So I'm just curious, one more point on this. You mentioned, number one audiences on LinkedIn are salespeople, marketers. So basically go to market, let's say people. How do you think about it for someone who's selling into not go to market people, who's selling into chief medical officers, who's selling into CFOs? Does LinkedIn still make sense in your perspective or no?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's more white space. Like I think you would be early, right? Which is good. I think that's good, right? I don't think you immediately your goals don't become to build a 50,000 person audience. It becomes you just get really way more targeted. With some of what you do and some of what we do, it's like you making sure you're connecting with the right people. You can accelerate your kind of because there's less of that echo chamber, right? I mean that in a positive way. There's less medical professionals. There's less chief chief medical officers, and so on and so forth. You would probably have to accelerate audience acquisition or with ads, right? Thought leadership ads or whatever to kind of accelerate that process. But I do still think it works. I just think you're earlier. So I think it's still worth it. Maybe, and then you test it for a couple months to really see if it works, right? Before you invest for the next 3 years or whatever. But I still think, yeah, it would probably be worth it. It also maybe becomes a bit of a different motion. Like once I worked with someone in real estate, right? And like, how does real estate work? Right? It's all word of mouth. Like typically they get referrals. So with the real estate guy, we weren't built, the audience wasn't growing huge, right? Like it wasn't, but by connecting with everyone in his existing real world relationship, we're able to kind of replicate that word of mouth motion on LinkedIn because his real world network now is seeing all of his content on LinkedIn and he stays top of mind from them. So when they have a referral, they're like, oh, okay, blank. Let me think. Okay, I just saw his post. And boom, I'm going to send him a referral. So like, it wasn't like he was building a big audience, but he also had his best year ever. So it's like maybe the metrics need to change a little bit. Like, how does it work? It's also less competitive, right? Like if you a chief medical officer, you could probably become the biggest chief medical officer influencer on LinkedIn because there's not a lot of competition.
Right.
So then that would lead to more stuff as well. So
makes sense.
I do think it works. It's different. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, let's say we now have the raw necessary ingredients to, build someone's audience to make them big, right? We picked that person, we have that person now. How do you think about what makes a great, let's say even post, what makes a great post for that person? We now have that founder, CEO, big company. They have relevant experience for the people that they're talking to. They have a unique point of view on a whole bunch of different things. They're willing to be spicy and vulnerable. Now, what makes a great topic, a great post?
I think it changes, right? Like I think early on you have to lean really heavy into like no one knows who the hell you are, right? Like you have to be comfortable saying, I accomplished this thing. I helped grow this company from this to this. I did this. Like very early on in your audience building journey, you have to be comfortable. It's not bragging if it's true. I know some people have some resistance to that, but I'm not saying that you have to be able to lead with that stuff early on is kind of my perspective, right? Because no one knows who the hell you are yet. So I think you kind of lead early on with your experience and like put in numbers, right? Like people want to know. There's a lot of people on LinkedIn that talk about all kinds of stuff that have no business talking about what they're talking about. So like you can't just say I helped grow this company. It's I helped grow this company from 5 million to 40 million, over this period of time. And here's kind of like 6 insights about it. Like, and I think over time, like you can kind of get away from that content, but early on, I think it needs to be a pillar. So yeah, that's how I would think about it early on, right? Like a lot of it.
So do you think about these as, let's say, case studies, almost case studies, maybe for yourself, where you talk about results, right? And ideally, you want to talk about a numeric result, a quantified result. Like I helped build this company from this million ARR to this million ARR. I helped build the team from 20 people to 100 people. I grew our website visitors from 20,000 to 50,000, right? Quantifiable results that help you showcase credibility, because unless you are, let's say, CMO at Gong, where even if no one
Sure.
has ever heard of your name, that title combined with that company already gives people be like, okay, I should pay attention to that person.
Yeah, I should get totally, totally.
But
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
most people, you don't. So you need to prove to them why they should pay attention to you.
You have to earn their right, like earn their attention. Obviously, it's super competitive on the feed. And like I would usually like their historic wins, you were at this company early on. You worked at this big startup. You worked at this. It's like we're looking for points of social proof, essentially, that can catch an eye, that's going to make someone pay attention. You worked at this famous startup. You helped grow revenue this. We did this big campaign, this big deal, whatever, and then kind of break down the tactical nature of how you do it. Um, I think you then through that process, again, you can't do it on every post and it can't be just historic. It could be like last week we had, again, you ran a campaign or you ran some initiative or whatever. Over time, that helps kind of people like, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. Let me listen. And then from there, you can get a little more free form, right? On like what you want to talk about. But like early on, I think it's very important to be very strategic about what you are kind of putting
Mhm.
out there if you want to, gain that traction to grow an audience.
I think now it makes sense to talk about your ideation process. So maybe number one, talk a little bit like structurally, how do you work with these people? Like what's the cadence? How do you ideate? What does it actually look like? Length of the call, how often it happens. And then from there, we can dive into like what you look for and how you extract these things from them.
Sure. I think early on, it's at least an hour a week that's just pure talking, right? Like, I don't know you that well yet. I don't know how you think. I don't know what you think about things. So, you can listen to some podcasts and, watch videos or whatever, but those tend to typically be like kind of filtered versions, right? Like, I want the raw version I want to know who you are behind
Mm,
closed doors. You know what I mean? And then from there, we can help synthesize that into stuff that's like, consumable that doesn't ruin your brand. But at least an hour a week. Again, it's a little different if we've been working together a long time. A lot of it can be done asynchronously, or you're only coming to me when you're stuck, or so on and so forth. But I think the best version to do it is at least an hour a week, right? Of just
mhm.
what happened over the last week. What are you thinking about? Who are the conversations you're having? Like, what customers did you talk to? What issues came up? Because you're running an active business. As I always tell clients, like, you're not a content creator, like you're a journalist, right? Like you are
Mm,
building a a business, and like everything you do in your life like is content. You had a uncomfortable conversation with a vendor, someone had to be let go, you talked to the investors, you had big wins with the customers. Like within all of that, there is content. It's like, how do we get as I always talk about, like your founder brain, your spotlight to look at that stuff and surface that stuff within this conversation where it's like we'll be talking and it's like, okay, nope, that was it. Like that, like the thing, like you thought it was this, and then you're talking, I'm like, okay, tell me a little bit more. And then it's like actually the third thing you said, like, no, that's the idea. Like that's the post. Like, and then once we have the idea, it's like, okay, what's our hook? Like, let's either I can help write it or we'll kind of ideate it on it together. Or they'll do like an early draft and I'll come in and, fix the hook. But again, I'm trying to stay pretty authentic to their voice. So I'm not trying to come in and make it me, right? I'm just trying to make it the most consumable version of them. So,
yeah. So let's spend some time on here because I feel like there's a lot to unpack here. So an hour a week to get to know the raw, real person and what's in the head and what they're thinking about. Do you have a certain structure that you follow for these calls? Do you have a certain set of predefined questions you ask every time? Do you just follow your curiosity?
I follow my curiosity for the most part. Early on, it's a little more defined about like we want to go over their big wins, and I want to get their history of where they were and what you've accomplished, and like some big wins, some big losses. The classic type stuff you would ask early on. So I get like again the backstory. I got to catch up
Yeah.
first, and then as we get to like a regular cadence, is much more about following my curiosity and me, combining what I know about LinkedIn and what's popular and what people are wanting to consume with what they're doing in their real life, and then finding those threads. They're pretty good indicators, right? If they're speaking to their target market or they're selling to their target market and they are their target market, typically your sales leader, you're selling to salespeople, your CEO, you're selling to who's historically a sales leader selling to salespeople, like, you know what resonates. We may just help
Yeah.
you get to like the best version of it. And the difference on LinkedIn between like a 70% version and a 95% version is a huge difference in follower growth, right?
Yep.
So we think of it, I keep saying we, but it's me. It's like marble, right? Like I'm helping sculpt it, right? Like you're coming to me with all this raw material and we're chipping away at it until we get the best possible LinkedIn post, essentially, right? The best possible idea.
So you do this 1 hour thing, you follow your
Oh, sorry.
curiosity. Yeah.
Really, let me say this. It is 1 hour, but like, part of the what you're signing up for with dealing with CEOs is they're very busy people, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
they can't make these meetings. Sometimes they want to voice note you. Sometimes it's just a text or a random call here or a random call there. And like, that's part of what you're paying
Yep.
for, is like that I'm
Yep.
available to you when the moment strikes,
Yep. Yep.
because I
Yep.
want that stuff. So, I cannot, as far as like scaling this as a business, obviously a little difficult because CEOs are not going to use your Trello board. You know what I mean? They're not going to go through a productized version of this service. They want something that's pretty bespoke. They're all unique and they all operate differently, right?
Yep.
Some love the voice notes, some love the calls, some love the consistent Monday meetings. They're all a little different. You just kind of have to figure out how to work with them.
Yeah. I think one thing that I find pretty useful in terms of just remembering maybe the interesting things that happen is to literally just pull up the Google Calendar and look at the last week and be like, you had this meeting here, like what happened
Yeah,
there?
yeah,
Or,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
wait, what is this 4 hour chunk here where you like, because like I know
totally.
this too, I look at my calendar and I'm like, I think back of like what interesting happened last week. I'm like, I don't know. And I pull up my calendar and I'm like, wait a second, I interviewed Adam Robbins on my podcast. Like I can
Yeah.
come up with things that I remember from that interview. Right. So
They should be keeping, like, you are training. That's like, it is coaching, right? Like
mhm.
like, part of it is like early on, I thought of myself a little bit as like a personal trainer, right? Like part of it is like you're paying for this, you're going to show up, right? Like what's the point of paying for a private trainer if you're not going to show up to the gym? Like you want to get
Right.
better, you got to show up. And so
Yep.
you could also do the things outside the gym, which means like take some notes, like start thinking about ideas. And again, it's not all on you. I'm obviously going to send you okay, I saw this. You liked this on LinkedIn. Like,
Mm,
why did you like, why did
mhm.
you, whatever. Like, so that's actually an idea that one of my partners came up with that, which is great, right? You just got to kind of consume their full universe and really put yourself in it.
Right. Have you ever thought about or figure out the principles behind when someone talks about things that they're thinking about and that are happening and they're going through a bunch of things that makes you be like, no, 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 that one, not those two first ones, man, this one, like that's the one. Like what makes it the one? Like do you know what makes it that?
Yeah, I think it's gonna it's because it's unique, right? Like I think, yeah, that's a good question. Have I ever dived really into like, I mean, a lot of it, unfortunately, from a process point, is just like instinct, right? So I've been
Yep.
on LinkedIn for so long, and I'm so ingrained in the audience that they're trying to sell to, salespeople or go-to-market professionals, which typically tend to be my clients, that I know what's going to resonate with salespeople or marketers better. Again, that's kind of goes back to what you're talking about, the chief medical officers. Like, I don't know the thing that's going to resonate with the
Right.
chief medical audience as well. Like, but if you're a go-to-market professional or revenue executive, I have a much better idea. So I don't know. The differentiators I would say is, there needs to be some contrarian take to it, right? Typically, or something that's
Yep.
a little different, or a bold
Right.
claim of some kind. Like there's all these different things that it could be. I have a hard time, like, you know, processizing it. Like I was like, oh, I look for these three things. A lot of
Yeah.
it is kind of instinct. So it's just like,
Right.
okay, that that was the thing. You can also
That's why you have a high
tell
hourly
by
rate.
like, yes, yeah, yeah. That is why I have high. But it's also like what you can kind of see it in their face. You know what I mean? Like if you're talking to them and they get kind of jazzed up about something, it's like, okay, like why
Mm,
is it why are you getting animated and heated here? Because like you actually care. And that inevitably is going to lead to better content, right? So they can be talking about things that I think will be good hooks and whatever, but like if they don't care, like it
Yeah.
doesn't, it's never gonna, the rest of the post is gonna be blah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Given that, do you feel like you would not be able to help a chief medical officer, or is it just you can
no,
get that
I
last mile? Do you need someone who has medical experience and background to be that sparring partner, or does it work with someone else?
I think I think if they're the expert, we can make it work. But I need an example of like other influence. There not might not be 10 chief medical officer, which I like because we're using an example influencers on LinkedIn. But
Yeah.
there are people that are popular within that space somewhere, right? They may
Yeah.
be on Twitter, they may be on blogs or whatever, and we can go find is like someone else is already doing this kind of thought leadership play, most likely
Yeah.
in your space, right? And they are more advanced than we are at this point. Like, let's go consume everything they have and
Yeah.
figure out like what the hell they're talking about and find the trends. Okay, here are the
Yeah.
ideas that keep coming back. But again, it might be more of a slower curve or whatever, like growth curve. But
Yeah.
the reason it's easy on salespeople and marketers or easier is because there's so much content out there on LinkedIn. You can see what's working and what's not working, what people are resonating with, what they're leaving in the comments or whatever.
Yeah.
You need that feedback mechanism somewhere, like Twitter, blogs, conferences, podcasts, whatever. It's like you got to figure out somewhere. You can't just start from scratch. But so
Yeah.
I would think it would be more difficult, but I don't think impossible.
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay, so you're on that call. You're talking through what happened last week, what they're currently doing, what they're working on, what they're thinking about. You look for that gem that's contrarian, that makes them get excited about it. Now, okay, let's say you found it and you're like, wait, that's the one. Is your next step writing down the hook?
It's typically to formulate it come one of two ways. Either immediately I'll be able to formulate like, okay, here's the idea, like the hook of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
It may not be a perfect, it's like a 60% draft that can then give them some jumping off point to give me like the body, like the raw material, right? Like or it's like, okay, I don't know what that is yet, but like, okay, write it and then I find it. Right. So it's like, because you're going to give me more information. And then within it, I'm going to be like, okay, oh, it's actually this thing that you buried in like the fifth paragraph. Like that actually gets moved to the top. And then I'm going to go back to you. I'll be like, I need a little more information on this because there's not enough here, but this is actually what's going to catch people's attention. And then, so it's kind of iterative. Like sometimes I can see it right off the front. Sometimes I'm going to need them to write a little bit more and then I'll go back to them. That's kind of what it looks like in practice. It's best when you can just, have it. Like it's different, like, some whether you're early in your LinkedIn stage or later or whatever, it's like you get better at it, right? So,
Right.
Like Adam is pretty good at hooks. I'm still like making them better or whatever, but like he's thinking about he's a hook, he's thinking about it, you know what I mean?
Right. And I find it's just much easier to write the post once you have the hook. Because the hook
totally.
is, just to define it for the audience, if they don't know, if you're on LinkedIn, the hook is the very first thing in your LinkedIn post. It's generally the first 2 or 3 lines of text, which is what people see on their feed before they have to click on read more. It's called the hook because that's what hooks people to then make the decision to say, you know what, this is promising. I'm going to click on read more to then read the whole post. So if you're losing them there, they're never going to read your post. So you need to hook them. Yeah.
Every line in a LinkedIn post is to get them to read the next line. Like it goes doubly, if not, triply true for the hook, right? But the rest of the post should still be the same thing. Like no excess words, everything leads to the next thing. Like you have to capture their attention. But as you're saying, like, yes, it's that hook. It's that first 2 to 3 lines that like, if you can't get them past there to stop scrolling, like it doesn't matter what the rest of the rest of it could be the best thing ever written, but it won't matter because no one's going to read it. So spend a lot of time on hooks.
Right. Now on that, and I think Ogilvy said, once 80% of your advertising budget should be spent on the headline, which is basically the hook, something like that, which is the same idea. What makes a great hook? Like when you look at it, when you review it, when you write it, what are the couple of ingredients? And again, I'm sure there's lots of intuition here, but what are maybe some of the ingredients that you try to look out for?
Credibility. Like I think there's credibility is important. Either you were talking to this type of person or you accomplished this thing or we did this thing is very important. But I also think it's like storytelling, right? Like if you can start with like a time frame, right? Like that puts people in it. Like last week, last month, this year, like you have to kind of start with the story. It also helps very like early on to call out your persona, right? Like who is this content for? Like
Mm-hmm.
use words that like people can self-identify that this is for me. Like if you're talking to salespeople, qualification, multi-threading, or use sales leaders, use account executives, whatever. It's like let
Yep.
people opt in, and when they're seeing this, they're like, oh, this is something that I could be interested in. That was some kind of like, obviously contrarianism, or it's like something that's like a little, well, like you say one thing and then the next sentence kind of flips that on its head, right? Like I think
Yep.
that is kind of the recipe for what works. And then obviously we've talked about, I don't know if we've talked about, but like you need the cliffhanger, which is that kind of last,
Mm.
the stop them with that, putting them in a place and time with some big result or some contrarian take. And then you got to be like, okay, what are you going to get if you click more? So it's like, here's my 5-step playbook, or let me break this down, or here are the numbers behind this, or like it always helps to have that cliffhanger. Again, LinkedIn changed. You look at the original kind of Justin Welsh approach. You used to get 5 lines. You know what I mean? Like it used to be
Yep.
different. It would
Yep.
be like
Yep. Yep.
one line, one line space, one line space. That third line was the
Yep.
cliffhanger. Now
Yep.
you've got to fit it all into 3. So my hooks have tended to move more towards like no paragraph breaks. I want
Yep.
all that space.
Yep.
I want every word in that hook to capture you versus using the white space. So it's like literally like a mini little paragraph more than anything these days. Again, it's not a hard and fast rule. You'll see tons of people that don't do it, but that's kind of what's been working for me these days.
Do you optimize for, because I think on desktop it's 3 lines, on mobile it's 2 lines. Do you think about that at
Sure.
all?
I think if it's written well enough, I still, ironically, I it goes against best practices, but it's like I want more space. So ironically, I optimize typically for a desktop because I want those three lines, but it needs to be written in such a way that like
Mobile still
it still
gets,
works.
yeah.
It still works for mobile because you don't
Yeah.
get that much space, but also you lose a lot of space if you're only optimizing for mobile. You get like a sentence and a half or something.
Yeah.
You get like very little.
Totally.
So the idea is if you optimize that first sentence enough, they'll click read
Yeah.
more. So
I think
yeah.
what you mentioned with the calling out is really important, and I think it's counterintuitive to people in the sense that I did a post the other week, and the hook was basically like, if I was CMO at a B2B SaaS
Yeah.
doing 1 to 10 million ARR,
It's a
replicating
great
the Chris
post.
Walker playbook, here's how I would do it, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is if I would have made that hook, if I was CMO at a B2B company, I mean, I didn't test it. I'm pretty sure it would do less well, even though CMO
Sure.
at a B2B company is actually a much bigger audience than CMO at a B2B SaaS doing 1 to 10 million. So I'm actually narrowing my audience, but by calling them out specifically, those who fit in there immediately think, oh, that's for me. Well, if you'd say CMO at a B2B company, a lot of people will like, I don't know if that's for me. Like, sure, we're a B2B company, but that can mean a million things.
100%. The specificity matters. And I think I had a similar one like a couple of weeks ago about like if I was a CRO at a 50 to $100 million, something Sam did. It's like that is what calls the, like it's like a storytelling. I think I kind of lead that into storytelling. Like what's a better story? Like if I was a B2B CMO, I can't really see who that B2B CMO is.
Yep.
But if I was a B2B CMO in SaaS who had to get to 10 million or whatever, it's like, okay, that's a very crystal clear picture on who on this area you're kind of laying out. So yeah, we didn't talk about that, but I do think like that's 100% correct. Like you have to be very specific and detailed. Otherwise it just reads as bland,
Right.
Totally. It's
Okay.
Phenomenal hook. Plus you had the Chris Walker bit in there, which is its own bit of social proof, which is great.
Yeah. Well, and I did Chris Walker / Adam Robinson, and then Adam Robinson commented, which obviously that's the best case scenario because then his audience sees it. Okay. So you have the topic, you have the hook. Why do you have your clients write the copy? Because most agencies, they do ghostwriting.
Yeah, they don't.
Right. Yeah. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think it does a couple things. One, it's better. I've tried the That doesn't work forever. This is not that this other model doesn't work, right? But it's just like, for me, I can get more of the nuance of their voice if I can actually have them write, right? And I think it leads to better, over time, a stronger and more distinct point of view. Like, a lot of things are lost, in my opinion, on a voice interview. I've tried it early on, right? Like, we'd talk to them and they would say, like, by actually forcing them to write something from start to finish, whether it's complete or not or whatever, like, the idea actually becomes crystallized, right? Like, you get to the best version of that idea, which leads to the best version of the post. I think additionally, that is kind of where you find their voice, right? It's like actually in the writing where I can see they said something this way versus that way. And I start to get a sense of like, okay, here's how you actually write versus how you speak. And it's like a written medium, right? So I really want the best version of how they write. I also think it's not for everyone, right? But I think it opts them into it. They take more ownership of it, right? Like,
Yep.
I'm not writing it, you're writing it. When you get those likes and you get that dopamine hit, like, that's because of what you did. Like, that's like you become bought into the process. It becomes less of a commodity where you can try to strip it out to get to someone else, where it's like, it's yours. You have ownership, which is 100% true. They write their content. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think that is very important for these folks. And something obviously they should take a lot of pride in. They're the ones who spend the investment of time to really put pen to paper, right? So they own it. Every comment they get that's like, I love your content, I've been consuming it, like, that doesn't feel authentic to them. Like, that is true. So I think that's how I came to that. I also just, I don't know, it helped me create the best content. I knew that combination of like your raw thoughts, my ability on LinkedIn, and us working together led to the best possible content. And so
Yep.
that is always what I've left for. It is not for everyone. Like, I have a
Totally.
very weird value prop where you're gonna have to spend, you're gonna have to pay me a bunch of money and then you're gonna have to spend a bunch of time. Like, I'm not saving you the time. I'm gonna accelerate your growth curve and we're gonna build a bigger audience and it's gonna work better. But again, this is not something that can only, you know, I it's going to take you a couple hours a week early on. You know what I mean? Like, to write, to do comments, to whatever, like, you really got to be bought into it if you want it to work. So it
Right.
helps like screen people out that aren't ready.
I think that's a great, so, I mean, founders, CEOs, executive, they're super busy. So the idea of ghostwriting is obviously super appealing because it's going to save them a bunch of time. So if they need to write it themselves, you need to get people who are actually really committed, because otherwise they're like, and they need to already believe and see that LinkedIn has all of this potential. It's not just like a cute channel where they can get a couple of likes and some PR. So you have the ideation session, you come up with the hook or at least the general topic of what we want to talk about. Then you're like, okay, you write it. Do you give them any guidance? Like, do you tell them like, hey, here's like something to help you structure or scaffold it?
So on some of them, we'll have talked it through already, like where the hook provides the guidance. Okay, here's our 5-step playbook. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or, we've talked through exactly like, here's the part, but a lot of the structure comes afterwards. Like, again, I think of it as raw material, right? Like, I don't want to give them too much because I want to see exactly what you're going to say. And then I can find it, right? So it's like, and then we just chip away and cut at it until like it is the best version of itself. So I think some structure is necessarily built into the hooks, where we often work a lot on the takeaways are very important. Like, the hook is important, but the takeaway is probably like a pretty close second to drive engagement, unless you're having some kind of, in summary type moment. And that kind of ends with some kind of pithy 5-word, 2 short sentences, things that people can be like, yes, that like ties back to the hook, that like is the payoff for this whole post that you read it. Like, that's why people smash the like button. So it's like, I spend a lot of my time on the beginning and the end. And then in the middle, doing a lot of cutting and editing. And it's like, sometimes they'll write and like cut out, some percentage of it, and that goes into another post or whatever. But I try not to give, it's like I said, I try not to fit them too much into a box because I want to see what they're going to say. And that's just kind of what's worked for me over the years, not that that's like, there's another way of doing it.
And is the task for them to write down stream of consciousness, kind of the first draft, like, don't try to get this perfect? Or do you want them to already like really flesh it out and come to you once?
it gets better over time, right? Like it's like early on, it's more stream of consciousness, raw material. Like over time, if the feedback mechanism is working, which is LinkedIn, right? Like they're very successful people. They can see that this post worked and this didn't. And like they can start to pick up on why it worked and why it didn't. And like you build this big feedback machine that kind of just constantly grows where they're getting much better, the content is getting much better. And like eventually over time, it's less it's less time intensive, or they come with something that's 80% over 40% or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just like the more you invest in it and they see it, and that's why I think that the writing part really helps. Is like, if something is ghostwritten and doesn't do well or whatever, you can like kind of blame the ghostwriter, like it wasn't me. But it's like if you wrote it and like it didn't do well, it's like, well, I want it to do better next time. It's like, okay, why didn't it do well? Like this seemed to really work, and like
Interesting.
this one really killed, and this one didn't. And it's like, why? So I think that's part of like the overall process.
Right.
It's all pretty fluid, as you
I
can
think
see.
a nice little side effect of that is also that I noticed it makes a big difference that when I publish, I'm around to answer early comments because it sends people back who commented. And also then the next wave of people who see it, they see, okay, this person actually replied to things, were thoughtful. So it makes them more likely to also comment or ask a question. And when I publish it and I wrote it, I'm just, because I want to see how it does. Like I'm just around and be like what's happening here? Versus if you have it ghostwritten and then scheduled and then it goes out at some point and you're in a meeting and then you come back to it 2 hours later and you're like, oh, there's 7 comments now, but maybe I'll answer them now, maybe I'll answer them tomorrow, whatever. It's just, you're not going to get the same kind of results from that too.
Totally. You have to build let me close my door really quickly. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like you said, the thing about the comments, like that's, I think, the hardest part, but it's like it's audience service, right? Like think about it in the way, like exactly like you just said, your favorite person on LinkedIn did a post, you leave a comment. Okay, they don't respond. You leave a comment the next time, they don't respond. Like the third time, you're not leaving a comment and you've just lost an audience member. So over time, as you scale and you grow, it obviously becomes much more cumbersome. It is harder, like, 12 months in to like write and to respond to every comment. But like early on, I think Adam said it really well. Like your community is built one comment at a time. Like you have to respond to the comment. It's part of what makes Adam, so successful at LinkedIn is he literally, Adam, the CEO of this company, is responding to every single one of those comments. And you can tell that it's him responding to those comments. And like without that, I don't think he grows as fast, right? And I don't think it has as big of an impact on business. So it's like, where are you going to put in the time, right? I think, you totally nailed it with the comments. The outbound comments is a little harder, right? Like, because I think that's super important, right? Early on,
and with outbound comments, you mean Adam commenting on other people's content?
Which I don't think we do that much. Like again, these are different levers you can pull, right? So if you're trying to grow an account, like you have all these different levers, right? You have connection requests, which we haven't even talked about, which are incredibly important, right? The outbound commenting, inbound commenting, content, kind of influencer relationships or whatever. But like, I think where the CEOs tend to not do as much, which is okay, is the outbound commenting. The thing is, if the account wasn't growing, I would be pushing very hard on like, here's a list of influencers. Like we need to be talking to these people. Like Chris Walker was the best possible fucking, like, I swear he built 40% of his audience just off leaving comments on other people's stuff because he would leave like these really in-depth.
They sometimes get like 70 likes or something. The comment.
Chris Walker, kind of Walker, like contrarian is like about attribution, whatever. I'm like, he's the best at it. Like that's part of like a huge growth lever for him that not everyone has the time to pull. But like those things are ad units. You know what I mean? Like every comment is an ad unit that draws people back to you and draws people back to your audience. But like it doesn't work if you say like great post. You know what I mean? Like you got to look at what Chris is doing, who I think has done it better than anyone as far as like what I would say is like an outbound commenting playbook essentially. He's done it so well. I always point to him as a great example, obviously.
So we have the hook, we have the body. I think one of the things that I see between people who, now this is not, it's not going to make sure that you actually do well, but a lot of Chris Walker's, Adam Robinson posts, and a lot of my posts that do really well, they max out the character limit.
Yeah.
Like they're long posts, like they're literally 3,000 characters. Now it's all value packed. It's not like fluff and a lot of, I feel like other people, they try to have this bite size, and then when I have like a super short post, how do you think about that?
Long is good. Long is good. More about it's like I'm with you 100%. They're maxing out, right? I think they're the best posts that I've ever done have all been pretty like they were written 3,000 characters. Oh,
Yep.
and like we had to cut it down because you're cutting down. That's what I was talking about, like this raw material. It's like write more, write big. Like we within that we'll find the best possible thing, and every word at that point has to matter. There's posts on Adams that I'm going through for like an hour, because or like two, like more than an hour, because I'm just like trying to get every single little word to work within fit within this box while he still says exactly what he wants to say without losing anything. I'm all for the long. Like it's not Twitter, it's not X or whatever. It's just like you get one shot at, you know what I mean? On Twitter, you can post 15 to 30 times a day. Like you have multiple, at bats. With LinkedIn, you get like one at bat a day, maybe two if you want to do it. Though I know some people do more than that, but like, so it makes sense to jam as much value into that thing as possible. Plus, it feeds into the algorithm or whatever of keeping people like, on the feed and dwell time and whatever, all these different kind of algorithmic nuances that they like to talk about. But yeah, I'm with you on that doesn't mean short doesn't work, but it should be part of your content strategy, right? Like it's okay to do short, but like it needs to be combined with these long pieces of like value or whatever. So maybe on a Thursday, it's like Tuesday, we do the long thing. And then on the weekend, there's the short thing. It's whatever. Just like we want to keep staying top of mind. And you're not always going to have this long thing. It goes back to like, I think LinkedIn has changed a little bit. Like, when I was working with, I'm working with Sam, he was started in 2000, like last year or mid 2022. I'm forgetting on the dates. It's been like, I don't know. I don't even know anymore. It's been a long time. But like the LinkedIn he posted, and this is to his credit, twice a day, was it 12 times a week? Like original content, obviously. Obviously we can talk about repurposing and like building and get into that or whatever. But like that's what worked back then. I think that still works. I think we've gone down to like one a day. I think the algorithm has changed a little bit. But like obviously you cannot write in that 12 a day type thing, 12 a week type thing, 12 maxed out things every time. You're gonna have a combination of long and depending on your content strategy. Adam only posts three, probably soon to be four times a week, right? Like if you're gonna get only three at bats, like you better have like something substantial to say, right? So I think the short stuff like works in the larger content strategy. It needs to be thought out as part of the larger, strategy.
Right. What do you think in terms of cadence right now? Like what's the good cadence? Like how often should you post? What's too little and what's too much?
Again, I think it depends on the audience and the creator, right? And their goals to a degree. But if like you're an early account and you're just getting started, like 3 really, really good pieces a week is better than 7 okay pieces a week.
Yep.
So I think as part of that calculation you have to make as the, whatever strategist or consultants or whatever you want to call it, of like, do we have enough to hit our goals with 3 or do we need 4? Do we need 5? Like, because there are growth goals. We're trying, like the account needs to grow a couple thousand followers a month, and those are incredibly valuable followers if they're all VPs of SaaS company, you know what I mean? So it's like, what is it going to take us to get there? I think if you've been creating longer, it becomes a little different because how I explain it to clients is like, this isn't content. Like you're creating intellectual property. Like this, every piece of LinkedIn content is intellectual property, right? Like that you've owned and you've crafted. Intellectual property, for anyone that owns intellectual property, is not only leveraged one time, right? Like this is a more elaborate way. It's a fancier way of talking about repurposing. But like you've created a large library of intellectual property that can be exploited and re-exploited for years to come, right? Your goal is to build that library of intellectual property. You can change it and you can edit it or whatever, but like what did I always say is like, an episode of Friends doesn't only run one time. Like sitcoms are played on repeats and whatever. It's like because people like it. So I don't know how I got onto that, but that is an important point for people to think about when it's like this is not a never-ending slog. It accrues. You're building a
Yeah.
library that can then
Yeah.
be exploited, and that makes it easier for you in year two
Yeah.
because you only have to write a couple of new posts a week, and you're busy, and we can still keep on our growth metrics because we can revamp something you wrote 12 months ago
Yeah.
and kind of add a new spin to it and kind of we've learned, okay, the algorithm has changed. So this one was written for that kind of 5 line hook, but let's redo it. Or it's like, oh, we're trying to talk to this audience, so let's move this to the top or whatever. So
Yep.
like
Yep. Yep. Yep.
it's intellectual property.
And I think that only works if you really focus on super high quality, dense content. I think Alex Hormozy made that point recently, and I think it's so good. What people don't realize is that the difference between an 8 out of 10 post, a 9 out of 10 post, and a 10 out of 10 post is non-linear, both in terms of the time spent and the results that you get. Like a 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 post, that's good, but it's not great. You can maybe write it down in like 10, 15 minutes. Getting it from that 7 out of 10 to 9 out of 10 will take you another 2 hours. Getting it from
Totally.
9 out of 10 to 9.5 out of 10 will take you another 10 hours. But the payoff of a 9.5 out of 10 post versus a 7 out of 10 post is like 100x. It's not like 20%.
100%. Could not agree more. That is exactly what we do, right? Like executive can spend 15, 30 minutes or whatever, get into a 7 or maybe as you were talking about, but it's like our job is to get it to a 10, right? Or to get it as close to a 10 as possible because the payoff, as you're saying, is exponential compared to doing a year of 7 posts versus like 3 months of 9s. Is like the difference between a 10,000 follower audience and like a 25 or 30,000 person audience. Like that is, huge, right? For your business and everything that comes from it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the analogy that he made is he was writing his newest book, $1 Million Leads. And he said, I could write a 9 out of 10 books probably in 3 months. But if I spend another 12 months on top of that, I can get it to be a 9.7 out of 10 book. And the difference between a 9 out of 10 book, it will sell for like 2 years. And then, book sales will drop off. If I do a 9.7 out of 10, it will sell for 200 years and it will keep selling after I'm dead.
God, he's really good. I haven't obviously know Hormozy very well, but because who doesn't know Hormozy at this point if you're in this space? But I haven't consumed enough of his stuff religiously, but every time I hear something from him, I'm like, yep, that is 100% correct. Yeah, that's super smart.
And I think another thing to think about in this quality quantity, and it's almost like a slider, right? Because you can spend less time per post and then you have more posts, or put more effort into a post and then you have fewer, but they're higher quality. Is, let's say you have 3 really great pieces of content per week that you put a lot of effort into. They are 9 out of 10. And then you're like, well, on these other 4 days, I'm just going to post a quick thought, some random idea, just put something out there, because why not? Now I have 7 posts, it's more. The problem is you're teaching your audience whether or not they will get value from your content. And if you post 3 great ones and 4 mediocre ones, that means there's a almost 50% chance when they see a post of you that it will be great. I feel like it's actually better to just keep it pure and just have 3 great ones, because what you're teaching your audience is that every single time you post, it's going to be fucking amazing. And so when they see something from you, it's a no-brainer to click on it because you've taught them that it's going to be amazing every time.
Yes. I have a couple of thoughts on that. One is that's part of the way we think about it is everyone should be an event. Well, there are 2 things. Then what? Actually, there's a lot that you said that I totally agree with. And then I also would push back on a couple things. It was every post should be an event. It's oh, there's a new Adam post. It's if you saturate it by adding in lower value stuff just to meet some kind of publication schedule or whatever, totally ruins that experience. I am wondering, and this is just new because thought leadership are ads. on the thought leadership ads is like, does that also have a negative effect? Like thought leadership ads are super like this new thing that are incredibly powerful.
Hmm.
Some clients are testing them and whatever, but at the same time, like now, are you conditioned, and that same, does that fight against that idea where it's like, oh, now they know it's an ad? You know what I mean? It's like, so it's not an event, it's an ad. Again, it's a little different, but it's something I'm worried about a little bit, or I think about. It's like, okay, so what does the thought leadership ad do toward the organic distribution? Because now they're not
Mm,
necessarily met with the most great piece of thing. They could be met with something that they think is, but then it's actually an ad. And do they feel tricked, or are they less likely to pay attention the next time because they've seen that ad twice because the targeting got screwed up or whatever? Again, that's but I also think that, and one of the other thoughts I had is like there is some value in like the personal, right? Like for like sharing about your life and like your family, and like that endears you
yeah,
to the audience in a way that's
yeah,
going to be like a big piece of value, right? That could fit into an overall content strategy if like you're on vacation or whatever. Just kind of like let people in to know who you are, right? That's why I think video, you don't need to do that if you're doing video, right? Because they get to know your face, right? That you do a lot of video. Adam does a lot of
yeah,
video. But like if you're not doing video and you're like a text only guy, the only or gal, the only time they ever see you is that little picture like on their feed. Like they don't really know your face. So in that case, like it does benefit you to occasionally put out those like pictures of yourself with the people so they can get to learn to know who your face is. So the next
yeah.
time they see posts, they have an idea of like, okay, this is who I'm reading. I know this person. It builds like audience affinity, right? So
Right.
if you
I
have a
agree
video
with that.
strategy, I don't think, yeah,
I think if you make it value added too, it's just going to do even better. Like
totally.
the post that I have in my mind that I still need to write is the hook is basically like I became a dad 14 months ago. I'm a first time dad, whatever. Here's 9 things I'm learning from my daughter.
Perfect. Yeah, yeah, that's great.
Right.
Yeah,
And then I can attach a picture of me with my daughter. That's going to do so much better than just me and my daughter and like, oh, I'm a dad for
sure.
one, so happy.
Yeah, yeah. So I totally agree with that. My point was more of like, it can't just, it's okay that it's not just pure thought leadership. You know what I mean? Like that you have
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that that's
Mm-hmm.
more, a little more personal, that
Yeah.
is still lends itself to like value and whatever, but that doesn't necessarily fit into the bucket of like speaking directly to your
Yeah.
revenue executive,
Yeah.
founder, CP. That kind of lets the audience get to know you a little bit as like a person outside of this CEO, this founder, this
Yeah.
executive or whatever. I
Yeah.
think it's a valuable part of it for sure.
I'm a little skeptical on thought leader ads. Um, I'm testing them. I'm testing them with
Yeah.
customers. My sense is that, I got super excited where, I have a post that did really well, like the Chris Walker playbook thing, got like 200 likes organically, 60,000 impressions. I'm like, it's going to fucking crush thought leader ads. And then you realize how much you pay for engagement.
I know it's
And
so
and
much. It's
my
crazy.
theory is that when you have a really, really great post, the algorithm is actually doing a great job surfacing it to people who don't know you, who are interested in that topic and will get value from it. And now that you run it as an ad, all the people who actually naturally find that topic interesting and would want to see it already saw it organically because the algorithm did the job
Yep,
of distributing it to. And now you're just trying to ram it down the throat of a bunch of people
totally.
who are just naturally not interested in that topic, even if they fit your ICP profile. So I don't know. I'm not.
I'm with you.
I'm
I'm
not
with you. I'm like,
sold.
I'm concerned about it. I think the one way, I think a lot more data would need to go into it. Like
Yeah.
I would only want to show, it's like if you could exclude all your connections and exclude all of your followers and exclude anyone
Mm-hmm.
that ever saw engaged with that post, and then send it out to like a really niche, segmented, targeted audience of people that you just really want to consume this, and you can exclude that they haven't seen it before, and you're only going to show it to them once or something. Like I think
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting tool. I don't think all of LinkedIn's native targeting things are, criteria is like enough to run it well, because I do definitely get concerned of like, it works for like your CEO who doesn't post, right? And you do one post or whatever, or, but like everything is different when you're actually building a big organic
Mm-hmm.
audience. I think like that it's like, everything else that everyone says works, like you need to put a big asterisk next to it, like because the organic algorithm is what you're kind of need to optimize for above all else. And like anything that could fight against that or whatever, like, yeah, it'd be very, it's early. I don't know. I'm not sure how they work at this point yet. And they're so
Yeah.
expensive. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to start wrapping it up here because I want to be respectful for your time. I have a call coming up. I feel like there's a million more things that we didn't touch on that we could touch on: network growth,
Yeah,
right? Connection requests, repurposing. Is there anything? And if you're down, I would love to do like a second episode at some point. Do you feel like there's anything that we need to at least mention in the last 5 minutes here that we've completely glossed over that's like super crucial and important for people to at least think about?
It seems I'm always having to constantly bring myself back to like, I'm trying to, at this point, we've been doing this a long time. Like, what's the next version? Like, what's LinkedIn 3.0 or 4.0 or whatever? But like, you're listening to this and you just start like, you cannot neglect connection requests as a strategy for growing your initial audience. LinkedIn is the only social platform on the planet where you can choose your following. Like, you can connect with them and they will become your followers and they will consume your content. And if you do it correctly in a very, very strategic manner, like LinkedIn does seem to be learning more and prioritizing more, like who's in your first degree network. And then by getting those people in your first degree network to engage with their content, LinkedIn will show that content to similar type people, right? So if you want to talk to VPs of sales from your content, you need to be connecting with VPs of sales. At the same time, and I also like, and if you're doing it like in an ABM type motion, say you want to sell into an account, I would never just connect with the decision makers. I would connect with 5 people above and 10 people below them to try to get penetration within that account, because LinkedIn also likes to show content to like coworkers, right? So if you can get 1 or 2 of those people to loop in, it's more likely to show it to their CEO and like blah, blah, all that stuff. So you got to be sending connection requests. Do not automate it. Like, I'm sure we can do a whole thing on LinkedIn tooling and whatever, but like if you're building a big audience, that is incredibly valuable. Using any form of automation is a risk to that audience and that distribution. Like, so send connection requests, like use a VA, use an assistant, you do it yourself while you're sitting on the front of the television. Like, that is our recommendation with some of the stuff that we've seen recently. Is like, I've seen a couple people who have massive content engines or whatever try to turn on some form of automation because they're getting tired of it or whatever. It's like, LinkedIn may not even warn you, but they are aware of what you're doing, and it's all against terms of service. So like, if you've built up a big valuable asset like an audience, just be very tender with it. You know what I mean? Don't try to run too fast. If you can only send a few connections, that's fine. Don't try to max out sending 40 a day, because it's going to ruin kind of what you've built. Or it could, that's the risk. And then as far as the inbound connection requests, like, be more thoughtful about who you accept as LinkedIn starts to learn more and prioritize those first degree people. If someone is trying to sell you web development services from some geographic area that you don't sell into, you do not want them in your first degree connections, because that's more likely they're going to engage with your post. And then LinkedIn kind of learns that, like, oh, these people like this type of content. Maybe I should show it to more. Like, I've used the analogy of like, you're a bouncer at a nightclub. Like, you only really want to let people in that like that have the right vibe. Like, you really like, it's people that you're going to sell to, or that work at companies that you could sell to, not people that are trying to sell you franchise services. You know what I mean? So just ignore those people.
Yeah, and we do need to wrap up here. We talked for so long that my AirPods are literally empty. And now I need to use my MacBook microphone to wrap this up. So Alec, this was awesome. There is so much in your brain. Like, you need to figure out how you package this and find your own consultant or whatever, because there's so much in the brain that I think is super valuable for people. So yeah, this was super fun. I learned a ton. So thank you for your time. Your LinkedIn, and I don't know, your website is it up? No, right?
It's funny. It's all grown so organically and word of mouth. I don't even have a website at this point.
Yeah.
It's like,
so
you can just connect on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we'll link your LinkedIn in the show notes so people can check you out, connect with you, send you a message.
Sure.
And Alec, thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was fun.